The market district on Orvaan Station had the comfortable noise of a place that runs on its own momentum and has no interest in the private arrangements of its participants. Somewhere above the stalls, the station's atmospheric regulators were cycling through what the environmental management system optimistically called mid-afternoon, producing a warmth that fell at a slight angle through the vaulted corridor and caught the dust that perpetually lived in the air above the spice vendors. The light was amber and generous, and it made everything look slightly more significant than it probably was. Thomas had been walking through it for entirely unremarkable reasons. He needed a replacement calibration tool for the docking sensor array he had been contracted to service, and a vendor on the East Corridor had been recommended to him by a man who spoke with the specific confidence of someone who has not actually checked whether the shop still exists. It did exist, which had put Thomas in a good mood. The tool was the right one, and the price was reasonable, and he had been walking back through the market thinking about nothing in particular when he heard his name. He recognized the voice immediately. What he did not immediately recognize was the context. He turned. Princess Ariana was standing perhaps 12 meters away with two women he had never seen before. She was taller than both of them, which was not unusual. She was taller than most people Thomas knew, with the long, elegant ears of her people rising above the line of her dark hair like a structural feature of her general composure. She was wearing something in a deep blue that managed to look both practical and deliberate, and she was gesturing in his direction with the casual ease of someone making an introduction that requires no particular ceremony. The two women were looking at him. They had crimson skin and the unhurried bearing of people who are accustomed to being given time to form their opinions. They were looking at him with the assessing attention of people receiving information about a subject they have apparently heard discussed before and are now evaluating the original against the account. One of them said something to the other in a low voice. The other nodded, with the specific quality of someone whose expectations are being confirmed rather than revised. Thomas stood on the market path and did his rapid internal accounting. The accounting went as follows. Ariana had said his name. She had then, based on the available evidence, said several other things about him, things that had produced in these two strangers the particular expression of people who are meeting someone they already know something about. She was still gesturing toward him. The gesture was comfortable. It was the gesture of someone indicating a thing that belongs in the sentence she is currently saying. He became aware that he was holding a calibration tool in one hand and doing nothing useful with the other. Ariana turned and found him already looking at her with the expression he was currently wearing, which he was fairly certain communicated the full complexity of his internal situation, without requiring him to say anything yet. Her composure made a small adjustment, not apology, not retraction, something more precise than either, the specific quality of someone who has said a true thing and is now observing its arrival in the person it concerns, and is prepared to wait while that person processes it. Her friends looked between them. They did this with the interested attention of people watching a scene resolve itself in real time, and whatever they saw apparently confirmed rather than contradicted what they had been told, because both of them settled into expressions of comfortable satisfaction. The atmospheric regulators chose this moment to cycle slightly, sending a breath of cooler air through the corridor. Somewhere nearby, a vendor was arguing with his inventory management system about a discrepancy it had flagged 3 times already. A child ran past Thomas with a piece of fried something in each hand and the focused energy of someone with a very clear agenda. Thomas looked at Ariana. Ariana looked at Thomas. He opened his mouth, decided against whatever he had been about to say, and recalibrated. Then he looked at the two women, who were still watching him with the benevolent attention of people who have front-row seats to something and know it. He said pleasantly that it was a very fine market. One of the women, the taller one, who had an air of finding most things moderately amusing, agreed that it was. The other one looked at Ariana with an expression that said, clearly and without words, that she understood now, and that the understanding was favorable. Ariana said nothing, which Thomas was already beginning to suspect was going to be a recurring feature of this particular afternoon. The taller woman's name was Cyril, and she introduced herself with the directness of someone who considers names a practical matter rather than a social one. The other was Davin, who offered her name and then immediately returned her attention to Thomas with the focused interest of a person conducting a quiet assessment and not particularly concerned about whether the subject knows it. Thomas introduced himself, which felt faintly redundant given that he had apparently already been introduced, but which gave him something to do with the moment. Cyril said that she had heard he worked on docking systems. Thomas confirmed that he did. Davin asked whether he found the work interesting. Thomas said that he found faulty calibration sensors interesting in the way that a locked door is interesting, mainly because of what happens when you get them open. Davin considered this and nodded, with the expression of someone filing information in a place she intends to return to. Cyril smiled. It was a quick smile, the kind that arrives and departs before it fully commits, but it was genuine, and it told Thomas something about her that he tucked away without examining it yet. Ariana stood slightly to his left and contributed nothing to any of this, which Thomas was now actively cataloging as a personality trait rather than a coincidence. He glanced at her once. She was watching the exchange with the composed attention of someone observing a process they set in motion and are content to let run. There was something in her expression that was not quite satisfaction and not quite amusement, but lived in the same general neighborhood as both. Cyril asked how long he had been on Orvaan Station. 7 months, Thomas said. Give or take. The contract had started as 3 months and had extended twice, which was either a testament to his work or to the station's persistent mechanical problems, and he had chosen not to examine too closely which. Davin said that the station had a way of keeping people. Thomas said that he had noticed. He had noticed other things too, over 7 months, but he kept that observation inside, where it was less likely to cause him any immediate difficulty. Cyril asked whether Ariana had shown him the observatory yet. Thomas said she had not. There was a small pause, in which Cyril and Davin exchanged a glance that contained more information than most conversations he had participated in that week. Ariana, to her credit, maintained her composure with the serene consistency of someone who has built it out of very durable materials. Thomas watched this exchange and arrived at the understanding that the observatory was apparently significant, and that its significance was, in some way, connected to the current situation, and that he was the only person present who did not know exactly how. He found this clarifying in its way. It told him that there was an account of him that existed in the world, in the minds of these two women, an account with specific details and presumably a shape, and that this account had been constructed by one person, using whatever materials she had selected and arranged in whatever order she had seen fit. He was standing in the middle of the market district of Orvaan Station, holding a calibration tool, being compared to his own description. He decided he was going to need something warm to drink before the afternoon was finished. Davin asked whether he had plans for the next cycle. Thomas said he had no plans that were not flexible. Cyril said that was very convenient. The way she said it was friendly. It was also the way someone says a thing when they have an opinion about it, and are deciding whether this is the moment to offer it. She decided it was not, which Thomas appreciated, because he was still doing the preliminary accounting, and was not yet ready for opinions from people he had met 6 minutes ago, however well-intentioned. A cargo drone hummed overhead, navigating the upper corridor with the patient precision of a system that has made this route several thousand times and expects to make it several thousand more. 2 vendors nearby were conducting a transaction that seemed to involve significant disagreement about the provenance of something in a sealed container. The station went on around them, unbothered. Ariana said, at last, that perhaps they should walk. Cyril and Davin agreed that walking was an excellent idea, with the pleasant ease of people whose afternoon has already delivered more than they expected and are happy to see where the rest of it goes. Thomas fell into step beside Ariana, slightly behind the other two, and said nothing for 10 full paces. Then, quietly, so that only she could hear it, he asked her precisely how long he had been her boyfriend before he had been informed of the arrangement. Ariana looked straight ahead. She said that it was a reasonable question. Thomas agreed that it was. She said that she would answer it, and that she wanted him to consider the answer carefully before responding. Thomas said that he would do his best. She said nothing further for another several paces, and the market moved around them, and the amber light continued to fall at its generous angle, and Thomas walked beside her and waited with the specific patience of a man who has learned over 7 months that she arrives at things in her own time, and that the arrival is generally worth it. They walked through the quieter end of the market, where the stalls gave way to permanent shops with actual walls and doors that opened automatically, with the slightly delayed timing of systems that had been meaning to get that fixed for some time. Cyril and Davin moved ahead at a comfortable pace, talking between themselves with the easy fluency of people who have been friends long enough that they no longer need to complete all their sentences. Thomas walked beside Ariana and waited, because he had said he would, and because 7 months had taught him that impatience around her produced nothing useful. Ariana said that the word she had used was the most accurate one available to her in the moment. Thomas received this information. She said that she had considered other words and found them insufficient. She said this without particular apology, in the tone of someone explaining a technical decision that made sense given the available options. Thomas asked what the other words had been. She listed 2. One was a term from her own language that translated approximately as a person whose presence has become necessary to the function of a day, which she had rejected on the grounds that it would have required translation, and the moment had not been suited to a linguistics discussion. The other was a standard galactic common term that she felt was too vague to be accurate and too formal to be honest. Thomas walked with this for a moment. He said that he appreciated her commitment to precision. She said that imprecision had always struck her as a form of discourtesy. Ahead of them, Cyril said something to Davin that produced a short, genuine laugh. Neither of them looked back, which Thomas was fairly certain was a considered choice on their part. They were, he was deciding, fundamentally decent people who happened to also find the current situation moderately entertaining, and he could not in good conscience hold either of those things against them. He asked Ariana when, specifically, she had arrived at the assessment that the word was accurate. She considered the question with the seriousness she gave most things. She named a date. The date was 3 months ago. Thomas counted backwards in his head. 3 months ago, he had been in the middle of a particularly difficult repair on the station's secondary docking ring, a job that had taken 11 days and had required him to spend long hours in a maintenance corridor that was technically climate-controlled and practically unconvincing on the subject. Ariana had appeared on the 4th day with a sealed container of something hot and had sat with him in the corridor for an hour without requiring him to be interesting. He had thought, at the time, that she was being kind. He was now revising his understanding of that afternoon, with the slightly disorienting feeling of a man looking at a familiar object from a new angle, and finding it has more dimensions than he had previously accounted for. He said that the 4th day of the secondary docking ring job was 3 months ago. She said yes. He said that she had brought him something to eat in a maintenance corridor. She said that she had. He said, carefully, that he had not at the time understood that to be a declarative act. She said that she understood that now. There was a pause. One of the automatic doors they passed opened with its characteristic delay, exhaled a breath of cooler air, and closed again behind no one in particular. A station maintenance bot trundled past them on its programmed route, paused to scan a scuff mark on the floor with the focused attention of a system that takes scuff marks seriously, logged the scuff mark, and continued on its way. Thomas watched it go with the feeling that it was managing its afternoon more straightforwardly than he was managing his. He said that if she had asked him, the answer would have been yes. She said that she knew. He looked at her then, properly, the way he had been managing not to do for most of the walk. She was looking ahead, at Cyril and Davin, at the corridor where it curved gently in the way of all corridors on a station built around a central axis. Her expression was the one she wore when she had already understood something, and was waiting with reasonable patience for the situation to confirm itself. Her long ears were very still, which he had learned meant she was paying close attention to something and preferred not to show it. He said that this was a very elaborate way of going about something that had a simpler available route. She agreed that it was. He asked whether the elaborate route had been intentional. She said that she had not planned it exactly, that it had developed according to its own logic, and she had followed the logic, and the logic had led here. He said that the logic had led to him learning about his own relationship from the interested expressions of two strangers in a market. She said that was a fair characterization. He said that he was going to need something warm to drink. She said there was a vendor 2 corridors over who made something that was technically not coffee, but performed all the same functions and asked fewer questions about your morning. Thomas said that sounded exactly right. Ahead of them, Cyril glanced back with the expression of someone confirming that the scene behind her is still progressing satisfactorily. Whatever she saw apparently met her standards, because she turned back without comment and said something quiet to Davin, and Davin's response had the sound of agreement. The vendor was exactly where Ariana had said he would be, in a narrow alcove between a data broker's office and a shop that appeared to sell navigational charts for routes that no longer existed, which Thomas felt said something either optimistic or cautionary about the nature of the market, and he had not yet decided which. The vendor himself was a compact man who did not look up from the screen embedded in his counter when they approached, and who took their order with the efficient minimalism of someone who has been asked for the same thing by enough people that the transaction no longer requires eye contact. Cyril and Davin had found a low bench along the corridor wall and arranged themselves on it with the comfortable ease of people who have no particular objection to waiting. They were talking again, quietly, the kind of conversation that pauses naturally when something interesting happens nearby and resumes when it doesn't. Thomas collected the 2 cups the vendor produced and handed one to Ariana and stood beside her in the alcove and tried the drink. It was not coffee. It was something with a slightly darker flavor and a warmth that arrived in stages, the first immediate and the second following a few seconds later like a considered afterthought. He decided he approved of it. Ariana held her cup in both hands and said nothing for a moment, which Thomas now understood was not absence but preparation. She was, he had concluded over 7 months, someone who treated words with the respect of a person who knows they are not retrievable once released, and who therefore preferred to be certain about them before they left. He waited. She said that she owed him an explanation that was more complete than the one she had given. He said that she didn't owe him anything necessarily, but that he was willing to receive one if she wanted to offer it. She said that 3 months ago, when Cyril had contacted her from the transit corridor outside the station, she had asked Ariana how she was spending her time on Orvaan. Ariana had begun to describe her days and had found in the describing that a significant portion of them involved Thomas, not in a way she had particularly planned. In the way that a gravitational body accumulates satellites, she said, which was not a romantic way of putting it, she acknowledged, but which was the most accurate model she had available. Thomas considered being a satellite. He found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he did not object to the model in principle, only to the metaphor's implications about relative mass. He said that, in the gravitational model, the satellite does not generally have an opinion about the arrangement. She said that she was aware the metaphor had limitations. He said that he had opinions. She said that she was counting on it. He looked at her. She was looking at the corridor, at Cyril and Davin on their bench, at the ordinary motion of the market afternoon around them. There was something in her profile that was careful and also, underneath the careful, something that was not quite uncertainty but was adjacent to it. The expression of someone who has made a considered decision and is now in the part of the process where the decision meets the world and either holds or doesn't. He thought about 11 days in a maintenance corridor. He thought about 4 months before that, when she had first appeared at a docking bay while he was arguing with a sensor array that was refusing to accept firmware updates, and had watched him for 10 minutes without announcing herself. And when he had finally noticed her and asked how long she'd been standing there, she had said long enough to form an opinion, and he had asked what the opinion was, and she had said it was preliminary. He had thought she meant the opinion about the sensor array. He was revising that now too. He asked how many opinions about him were preliminary and how many had been finalized. She said that most of them had been finalized for some time. He asked whether she intended to share them. She said that she had been sharing them in the available ways for several months, and that she had perhaps relied too heavily on the assumption that the methods were legible. He said, with the careful honesty of a man who is being fair to himself and to her simultaneously, that some of them had been legible, and he had not known what to do with the information. She turned to look at him then. Her expression made a small adjustment, something that was not surprise but was the thing adjacent to surprise when you are someone who does not surprise easily. She said that was useful to know. He said that he was offering it freely. She said that she appreciated that. The drink sent its second warmth through him, the considered afterthought one, and he stood in the alcove of a market on a station suspended in the dark between systems, and thought that there are moments that feel, in retrospect, like the last moment before something, and that the difficulty is that you can never identify them reliably in the present tense, only later, when you are looking back and can see the shape of what came after. He suspected he would remember this alcove. Cyril, from her bench, said without looking over that they were not in any hurry, and that the drinks at this vendor were very good, and that they were happy to wait as long as was necessary. Davin added that they had, in fact, the entire afternoon. Thomas said, without turning around, that he appreciated the support. Cyril said it was entirely sincere. Cyril and Davin left them at the junction where the market corridor branched toward the residential sectors, with the satisfied expressions of people whose afternoon had significantly exceeded its original brief. Cyril said that it had been genuinely good to meet him, and said it in the way that means the thing it says rather than the thing politeness requires. Davin said that she hoped they would see him again, and then looked at Ariana in a way that communicated, without any ambiguity, that she expected they would. Ariana received this look with the composure she received most things, and said goodbye in a way that was warm and also gently conclusive, the way you close a door you intend to open again. Then it was the two of them, in the corridor, with the ambient sound of the station around them and no particular direction established. Thomas finished the last of his drink. The vendor's alcove was behind them now, and the cup was one of the station's standard recyclable ones, and he held it for a moment longer than necessary before finding a disposal unit in the wall and returning it to whatever process the station ran on recovered materials. He had been on enough stations to find a certain comfort in the efficiency of closed systems. Everything went somewhere. Everything came back as something. He said that Cyril and Davin were good people. Ariana said that they were her oldest friends, that they had grown up in the same household, in the way of her people, where households are organized less around family lines than around shared purpose, and that they had known her long enough to be allowed opinions about her life that she did not always welcome but generally trusted. Thomas asked what opinions they had offered about him specifically. She said that Cyril had said he seemed like someone who thinks before he speaks, which she had offered as a compliment, because she found the opposite quality exhausting. Davin had said less but had looked more, which was characteristic, and that her looking had been favorable, which was not guaranteed. Thomas said that he was glad to have passed the assessment, and meant it, and also noted that he had apparently been assessed without his knowledge or consent, which was becoming a theme of the afternoon. Ariana said that she understood the observation. He said that he was not making a complaint. He was making an observation. She said that she understood the distinction. They began walking in the direction of no particular destination, which Thomas found appropriate. The corridor curved with the station's geometry, following the great ring of the structure around its axis, and the light shifted as they moved from the market section into the quieter passages that connected the commercial district to the rest of the station's life. The sound changed too, the dense layered noise of the market thinning into something more intermittent, footsteps, and the distant hum of the environmental systems, and the occasional automated announcement from a speaker that had been calibrated for a louder environment and not adjusted since. He asked her about the observatory. She glanced at him. It was a brief glance, the kind that checks something and then returns to forward motion, but he caught it. She said that the observatory was on the station's outer ring, in a section that was technically part of the science and research district, but which most researchers used only occasionally, because the view it offered was not useful for data collection, and its primary function was therefore one that scientists were sometimes reluctant to admit they had, which was simply looking at things because the things were worth looking at. He asked why she hadn't shown it to him before. She was quiet for a moment. The corridor passed a junction where a maintenance panel had been left open, its interior illuminated by the cool blue light of the station's power distribution systems, a tangle of conduits and interfaces that Thomas recognized the logic of even at a glance. Someone had left a diagnostic tool on the floor beside it. He noted this with the professional reflex of a man who has spent 7 months being responsible for things that other people leave unfinished. Ariana said that the observatory was a place she went when she wanted to think without interruption, and that bringing someone there was a different kind of thing than showing someone a market or a corridor or a vendor who makes something that performs the functions of coffee. She said that she had intended to take him there and had found, each time she had considered it, that the intention required a context she had not yet established. He said that she had now established a context. She said that she was aware. He said that he would like to see the observatory. She said that it was a 40-minute walk from their current position, or a 12-minute ride on the station's inner transit system, which ran on a magnetic rail and was reliable except on the 3rd day of each station week when it underwent scheduled maintenance, and today was not the 3rd day. He said that he had nowhere he needed to be. She said that neither did she. They found the transit station 2 corridors over, a clean platform with benches and a departure board that listed the next car in 4 minutes. There were 3 other people on the platform, none of whom paid them any attention. Thomas sat on the bench. Ariana sat beside him, close enough that the distance was a considered one rather than an unconsidered one, and he noticed this in the way he had been noticing things about her for 7 months, adding it to an account that was apparently larger than he had been keeping track of. The departure board counted down with the patient precision of a system that has no opinion about what you are about to do, only about whether the car will arrive on time. It would arrive on time. The transit car arrived exactly on time, which Thomas noted with the appreciation of a man who has spent enough time on stations to know that punctuality in a magnetic rail system is a minor daily miracle that nobody thanks the engineers for. The car was nearly empty. They sat across from a woman who was asleep against the window with the committed unconsciousness of someone working a long shift, and a boy of perhaps 10 who was engaged in a handheld game that produced small sounds of either triumph or catastrophe at irregular intervals, and who paid them no attention whatsoever. The car moved with the smooth authority of a system that knows exactly where it is going and has made peace with the route. Through the narrow windows, The inner workings of the station passed in the specific way of things seen from transit, glimpsed, suggested, gone before they fully resolve. Conduit runs and access corridors, and the occasional lit window of a space that belonged to someone's ordinary life. Thomas watched it pass and thought about 40 minutes versus 12, and about the fact that she had known the transit time precisely, and about what it meant to know the transit time to a place you have been going alone. He said, without looking away from the window, that she went to the observatory often. She said often enough to know the schedule. He said that she had been going alone. She said yes. He said that she had been thinking about taking him. She said yes. He turned from the window then and looked at her directly, the way the afternoon had been building toward without either of them managing to say so. She met his eyes with the steadiness that was characteristic of her, and that he had spent 7 months misreading as distance when it was. He now understood, simply the way she inhabits her own attention, fully, without the nervous motion that most people use to disguise the fact that they are paying close attention to something. He said that he had been thinking about her too, that he had been thinking about her in the way that becomes structural after a while, the way a thing stops being a thought you have and becomes a condition of the thinking. He said this plainly because she had been plain with him, and because plainness, he was deciding, was the right currency for this particular exchange. Her expression did the thing it had done in the market, the small, careful adjustment that was not surprise but was its neighbor. She said that she was glad he had said that. He said that he was glad she had described him to strangers in a market, because he was apparently not going to get there on his own. She said that she had calculated a 73% probability that he would not. He said that was a very specific figure. She said that she had been refining it for 3 months. The boy with the handheld game produced a sound of significant triumph, then immediately after, a sound of catastrophic reversal. He bore both with the equanimity of someone who has learned that the game gives and the game takes away, and the only reasonable response is to continue playing. Thomas felt obscurely that this was relevant to something. The observatory was at the far end of the outer ring, in a section where the corridor ceilings rose, and the walls gave way to the great curved transparency that had been built, according to the station's historical record, by the original construction crew who had decided, without authorization and with complete correctness, that people living in space ought to be able to see it. The authorization had been granted retroactively, which Thomas thought was the best kind. They stood at the window together. Outside, the dark between systems was absolute, and also, paradoxically, full of the light that had been traveling toward this window for longer than the station had existed, longer than the people inside it had existed, light that had departed its source before there was anyone here to receive it, and had arrived anyway, on schedule, patient as a magnetic rail system that believes in its own route. The stars were not arranged in any constellation Thomas had grown up with. They were somebody else's sky, which was one of the things he had been learning to love about being this far from where he started. He said that it was a very good observatory. She said that she had thought he would find it acceptable. He said acceptable was doing modest work in that sentence. She said that she was occasionally modest. He said that he had not previously observed this quality. She said that it emerged under specific conditions. He looked at her, and she was looking at the stars, and the stars were doing what stars do, which is to exist with complete indifference to the circumstances of the people observing them, while somehow, despite this indifference, being exactly what those people needed to be looking at. Thomas had grown up being told that space was empty. He had spent enough time in it now to understand that empty was not the right word. Present was closer. Waiting, perhaps, though waiting implied expectation, and he was not sure the universe expected anything. It simply continued, and left the meaning to whoever showed up with the right question. He had spent 7 months on Orvaan Station asking the wrong questions, or rather, asking the right questions in the wrong direction, orienting them outward toward faulty sensor arrays and firmware updates and calibration tools, when the thing that had been recalibrating, steadily and without his supervision, was something else entirely. He said that the answer would have been yes from the beginning. She said that she knew. She said it quietly, not as a confession but as a thing she had been holding carefully for 3 months and was now setting down. He said that they had lost 3 months. She considered this with the seriousness she gave most things. Then she said that the observatory would still be here tomorrow, and the day after, and that the stars outside the window were not going anywhere, and that she had, as it happened, no plans that were not flexible. He said that was very convenient. She said that it was. Outside, a cargo hauler moved slowly across the field of view, its running lights blinking in the patient rhythm of a vessel with a long route and no particular urgency, passing through the edge of the window and continuing on into the dark beyond it. Thomas watched it go. Then he looked at the stars, and at the woman beside him who had known the transit time to this place, because she had been coming here alone and thinking about changing that. And he thought that there are arrivals you recognize immediately and arrivals that take time to understand, and that the second kind are not lesser for the delay. They are simply the kind where the journey is part of what makes the destination make sense. He stayed at the window. She stayed beside him. The station continued, and the stars continued, and somewhere in the market district, the vendor who made something that was not coffee was still not looking up from his screen, and the automatic doors were still opening with their characteristic delay. And Cyril and Davin were somewhere in the residential corridors having a conversation that was, in all probability, going very well for everyone involved. Thomas had come to Orvaan Station for a 3-month contract on a docking sensor array. He had extended twice. He was already, without having said so yet, considering a third extension, and the reason had nothing to do with the sensors, which were, if he was honest, in perfectly good shape. He thought he would tell her that. He thought he would tell her that soon.